Okay, everybody, I think we're all good to start, and I think people will be trickling in as we go. Now, for a little bit about me, my name is Steve Nguyen. I'm a sophomore at the Marshall School of Business and co-leading SparkSC's Founders Committee this semester with my amazing co-lead, Amara. Besides being the voice behind the videos, which got me, and I'm sure most of us, through high school algebra, he is more importantly the founder and CEO of Khan Academy, a nonprofit educational organization that offers free lessons in math, science, and humanities in multiple languages, as well as tools for parents, teachers, and districts to track student progress. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to introduce Mr. Sal Khan. Amara, the stage is yours to now ask Sal some questions.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you, Sal, for being here with us today. We really appreciate it, and I'm going to hop right in for the sake of time. When you were first establishing Khan Academy as a business and a brand, what kinds of workplace norms did you wish to ingrain in the company itself, as well as translate across all branches of said company? What specifically about Khan Academy's culture and environment do you hope continues if and when you choose to take a step back from the company?
All right, there you go. No, I was clicking on mute, but it kept saying that I'm not allowed to unmute. So, but
okay, sorry about that.
The video conference gods have now conspired to let me unmute. No, first of all, thanks for having me. And to answer your question, the thing that I think a lot about this. It's one of the reasons why I set up Khan Academy as a not-for-profit is, how do you, if you're not successful, you kind of just go away and hopefully someone else can pick up where you left off. But, sometimes there's another curse as if you are successful, you almost become the incumbent, the thing that in the future people will say, why is that like the way it is? And they're bureaucratic and they're not innovative and all of that. And so, one of the things that I hope, and I don't know, we'll see if Khan Academy pulls it off, is that a lot of whatever the secret sauce might have been when Khan Academy got started, I mean, I have my suspicions about what it is, that we can retain it even as we grow and we scale. And, that is, many of y'all know, it started as a family project. I was tutoring my cousin who was 12 years old at the time. And I think people could tell that I was tutoring my cousin. Just in the terms of the tone, maybe sometimes the eccentricity of the platform, a sense of quirkiness, hopefully we don't lose that, a sense of just passion and wonder for the subject matter. I think a lot of times people who do, education, publishing, or whatever, things get made by committee, they get made in very professional ways, but you kind of lose the heart and you lose a little bit of the passion. So, one thing that I remind folks is as we scale, as Khan Academy is now a much larger team, and we actually have thousands of people around the world who've helped volunteer to translate, is that, you should be excited about something when you are making it yourself. And that's whether you're making a video, whether you're writing an article, writing an exercise, writing code. If you're not passionate about what you're doing, if you're not excited about it, it's going to show up to the user in some implicit ways. So I think that's the first one. And I think the other one is, don't be afraid to take risks. I think the more you have wins, the more everyone in life says, I have more to lose, and I'm afraid to take more and more risks. And I see that happening in our organization already, where we're afraid of letting to go, or we're afraid of risking some things that have been, that we've kind of won, in the spirit of trying something new. And, I hope that in the long run, we can constantly innovate and even disrupt ourselves.
That's great. Thank you. How do you plan your lessons and prepare for a lecture?
So, in the old days, it was me, sitting around introspecting with a bunch of textbooks and just doing a bunch of research. Now, we don't have a massive content team, but in each area we have 1 to 3 folks that are looking at the various standards, looking at where we have gaps, or looking at where there might be maybe a change in terminology, or the new standards are covering it in a different way. And they'll usually queue up like a request. They'll say, hey, this is the standard. And they'll write like a little bit like, hey, Sal, in the last video you used atomic weight, and now people use the term average atomic mass and whatever detail. And then they'll say go. And then, if it's like a math worked example video, it doesn't take a lot of time. In fact, I think one of the things to your earlier question about Khan Academy is that people can tell that I'm, when I'm making content, I'm not reading a script. It's really me thinking out loud while I'm doing it. So I still like to have that kind of extemporaneousness to the content creation. So, so sometimes people want to write like this really long request. I'm like, don't even do that. That's going to ruin it. Like, just give me some, I still want to have a little bit of my agency to impact and imprint and give, my own thought processes to folks to make it transparent. But yeah, that's the general, an algebra worked example video might take half an hour from literally the time that I look at the request to the time that I upload it. A world history video where I'm not, a deep expert on it, I might spend a couple of days immersing myself in that period of history and sometimes asking experts questions like, but why did that lead to that? None of the textbooks really explain it. And only when I feel like, okay, I really have this, I really grok this, then I press record and I go.
Perfect. Due to the onset of COVID-19, a significant number of American colleges and universities have been waiving their standardized test requirements. And even before that, students, teachers, and parents, and even some educators have expressed a distaste for standardized testing, claiming that, one, these exams may not properly assess the knowledge of the students, or that they even may carry cultural biases. Khan Academy is partnered with College Board, the institution behind the SATs. Do you think that standardized testing is a mainstay of higher education, or do you think that, as current trends may suggest, the system needs to adapt to more innovative mediums of student evaluation?
So I say yes to both. I remind folks that, if you take away standardized testing, what you're left with is non-standardized testing or no testing. And it's very hard to benchmark or even understand where you are if you're not measured in some form of a standardized way. And so you obviously have the standardized assessments that all of us grew up with, and no assessment is perfect, to be clear. And, no assessment can be, bias free and perfectly measure exactly what, someone's kind of worth is. In fact, no one should even think about an assessment that way. And so, the current assessments that are out there, I'm more in the camp that is, as long as you put them in perspective of kind of a complete holistic view of the person, they're okay. They're an extra data point, especially when you look at across the country or the world. Grade inflation tends to actually disproportionately happen at affluent schools. And so, people forget that things like the College Board came to be as an equalizer to level the playing field. So that, if you go to an unknown school or your family isn't connected, that you can still show that you have, the same capabilities as anyone else. With that said, I do think there's a lot of opportunity to innovate on how to assess people in a standardized way. There was an announcement University of Chicago made a couple of weeks ago. So I have a new project that I launched during COVID called schoolhouse.world. Encourage y'all to check it out. I view it as a layer on top of Khan Academy. It's a separate non-for-profit, but it does two things. It's a place for tutoring. So if you need tutoring, and right now it's in math and a few other subjects, but we're going to expand to all subjects over time. You can get there and you'll be matched up with group tutoring sessions run by folks like yourself, run by, it could be peers, it could be a professional who likes to volunteer a tutor. But another aspect of it, and that the part that's connected to what your question is, if you think about it, the ultimate proof that you really know the material is, can you teach the material? And so if someone is a highly reputed tutor of calculus, I don't think anyone would doubt their calculus capabilities. And then you're taking all that energy that normally goes to trying to perform, and it goes towards performing in a way that helps other people. And then if you're a college admissions officer or you're an employer and you say, wow, so-and-so is a really good tutor, not only do they know the material, but they must communicate well, they must have strong empathy, all of these other intangibles that go with it. And so, for example, University of Chicago just announced that they're going to be looking at certified tutors on schoolhouse.world, especially the ones with kind of a high reputation score, as a really interesting indicator for them on, the types of students they'd want to admit. And I hope that over time, we start looking at more and more factors like that. And I don't think it's a either or, I think it's an and. I think one of the problems is because you could standardize historically, the things that are measured on your traditional standardized tests, it probably overweighted those things versus some of the intangibles like communication, empathy, sense of humor. But I think that there's ways, especially leveraging things like peer-to-peer, where you can actually in a standardized way start to at least have some measurement of some of these intangibles. There's another project I'm working on. You're going to hear more about it in a few weeks, called Hello World, which it's going to be associated with a pretty major scholarship. But once again, to do well on that, it's going to be literally like, make us laugh. You have 3 minutes, make us laugh. And then people submit it. And then other people who have submitted will peer review it. And then the top ones will surface. So that is a standardized process. But it can hopefully, I'm hoping unearth other dimensions of people other than, what you get through traditional standardized assessment.
Cool. I'm super excited for that second project to drop. I'll definitely be looking into it. Kind of relating to your side projects, pertaining to higher education, you've stated in the past that there should be a way to create a credential that's recognized anywhere in the world. And that's kind of a better read of what you're capable of, not just academically, but your communication skills, how you work with others. Can you speak more to this idea and how you envision it being realized?
Yeah, I mean, everything I just talked about, I kind of view as kind of the building blocks of what you just described. I hope that in, let's call it 5 years, and I seriously hope it's within 5 years, that there is a way, maybe Schoolhouse is the vector, maybe this other project Hello World is the vector, maybe it's, maybe they all merge into Khan Academy somehow over time, but that you're going to have your core academic skills. You can master those on Khan Academy. You can authenticate that it was your work. And there's several ways we do it. In fact, on Schoolhouse, there's tutor certification. And the tutor certification, you record yourself getting mastery on Khan Academy on a unit test. And while you talk out loud, explaining your reasoning, you submit that to the community. Community will review that, say, yeah, that was your work. You didn't cheat. It looks like, and you explained your rationale. Yeah, unit 1 of calculus. So I think you're going to be able to show competency of like your traditional academic competencies, and you can put that on type of a profile or transcript. But then I also hope and intend, and that's where this Hello World project around being able to do kind of projects or more subjective responses to some type of a question, to make us laugh, or upload something that will give us faith in humanity, and then have a peer review system to surface the top things. Then that becomes part of your portfolio. And that, you can imagine that portfolio, that profile of the future, it'll say, yes, I have mastered such and such academic subjects. It will say, hey, I'm consistently ranking in the top 10% on challenges that involve entrepreneurship, or that involve humor, or that involve, oral expression, whatever it might be. And then employers or graduate schools or college admissions could directly access that and say, yeah, I'm interested in that person, or I'm interested in that person. Or you might be able to bundle some of those into kind of a signal, kind of a diploma saying, yeah, so-and-so has all the things that they really should be considered as with any other CS major, for example, for a first round interview at Google, or, I'm just making up stuff. But that's the hope, because if we can get there where we can really get to kind of a competency based system that anyone has access to, and it's holistic, then I think it leads to a lot of it opens up the possibilities about how people prepare for it.
Yeah, 100%. What are your thoughts on affirmative action, and how can Khan Academy fit into this conversation?
Yeah, I think we need to work as hard as possible for not just at college level, but I would say in industry, for it to be representative of the society that it's serving. And I think, I'll give an example. At Khan Academy, we have a mission free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. But we've recently doubled down, but that's especially, we need to make that true for students from historically underserved populations. But for us to do that as an organization, we should make sure that we also have representation, so that we understand the perspectives of those that we're trying to engage, that we're trying to help, that we're trying to educate. So broadly speaking, I'm very positive on the notion of taking proactive action in the name of equity, which you could call affirmative action. I think a lot of the debate starts and kind of comes to a head at like college admissions. And I think, I'm not an expert on all of the nuances on, which ways the various, the California Supreme Court goes, or the US, all of those nuances. And I remember even when this was actually in business school, when I took a business law class, there was some coursework on it, and under what conditions can race be considered, or other factors, or ethnicity. But my general view is we've got to invest a lot more before we get to that moment. We have to invest a lot more so that your race or your ethnicity, there, people can't see a correlation between that and whatever the output, whatever the outcomes are there. And so that's the goal here at Khan Academy. Reach students a lot earlier so that, my whole theory of action is, what happens to a lot of kids is, in a traditional model, they're moved ahead at a set pace, and you get an 80% in an exam, or you have something tough going on at home, or you have a teacher that you don't connect with for a year. And that, that, especially in math, but I'd say that happens in other subjects as well. You kind of, you don't get whatever you're supposed to learn in that unit or in that year. And then in math, you get promoted to the next year, and then you're expected to build on top of that. And it's hard to build on top of it if you have that gap. If you didn't understand basic exponents, it's really hard to understand negative exponents. I visited countless numbers of middle school classes where kids weren't really fluent with their multiplication tables. And anyone on the planet, if someone just sat down with them for like a week, you can become fluent with your multiplication tables. But if you don't become fluent with your multiplication tables, everything's just going to get harder and harder and harder. And you yourself are going to lose self-esteem. At some point, you're like, oh, I guess I'm not bright because I'm struggling with this. And so for, our theory of action at Khan Academy is, how do we personalize the education so that whatever circumstances folks are in, they can fill in those gaps? I don't know if it's a dirty secret or the real secret is, I always talk about mastery learning and this need for people to have multiple opportunities to fill in their gaps. And the reality is that, the affluent families have always done this. If their kids are starting to struggle, they will hire tutors, or they will do whatever it takes, send them to Kumon, whatever, to make sure that those gaps don't accumulate. So they are doing that mastery learning. And so I want to do everything possible so that, frankly, everyone on the planet has access to those same resources to fill in their gaps. That's where the schoolhouse.world effort is there too, is that, not only can you get the practice and the feedback on Khan Academy, which we're now working with a lot of school districts to do that even deeper in the classroom, but hopefully a layer of tutoring on top of that, so we can support as many people as possible.
Yeah, that's super insightful. Thank you so much. For the sake of time, I'm going to ask you our last question before we open it up to questions from the group. What is your favorite lesson that you've learned during your years as an educator?
There's a bunch. I'll tell you I'll tell you one of my favorite that, like, I don't know if it's actually interesting, but I like to pretend that I'm an interesting person when I say this at dinner parties. So I did a whole series on kind of ancient, on the Vedas, on, the kind of the core of ancient Hinduism. And in the Vedas, in the Rig Veda, the most mentioned god is Indra, who's kind of like the sky god. And his father's mentioned, I believe, 10 times in the Vedas. In Sanskrit, it's referred to as sky father. And in sky father, in Sanskrit, is Jos Pater, Zeus Pater, Jupiter. That blew my mind. That there's always been this view, and we didn't really realize it until the British went to India, and then they were taught Sanskrit, and they started to realize, wait, oh my God, the Sanskrit language is actually connected to Latin and actually German. They didn't actually realize that German and Latin were really connected until they saw the Sanskrit. But then to realize that, at a very ancient level, it was actually the same people, that these gods, Zeus, Jupiter, and Indra's father, were essentially the same entity. That type of thing, and as I go through all my research at Khan Academy, I keep finding stuff like that, and it blows my mind, because it makes you realize that the universe is a little bit more connected than you realize. On another dimension, I'll give another one. I could go for hours on this question. I don't know how many of y'all are familiar with Euler's identity. E to the I pi is equal to -1. Like, take the time to understand that, because it will blow your mind. Because, E comes from notions of continuous compound interest, or, the derivative of e to the x is equal to e to the x. So that's what's interesting about E, amongst other things. I, y'all know, square root of -1. Pi, ratio of the circumference to diameter of a circle. The fact that there's a very strong mathematical argument as to why e to the I pi power is equal to -1 is, like, it tells you there's some mystery to the universe that we're just beginning to unravel. Some people call that the proof of the existence of God. So I'll give, those are my two favorite. I could probably keep going.
That's definitely a beautiful thought to have and to end off on. Let's take some questions from the chat really quickly. Steve, if you want to spearhead that.
Yeah, so I'm just going to read some I got. The first one I got, well, not the first one, but one of the ones I got was from Angelina Escobar, and she asked, You've been a mentor for so many of us growing up. Who are some of your mentors, especially as you've gone through your journey in entrepreneurship, and how have they helped you learn and get to where you are today?
I think I would give a lot of credit to my first boss. Actually, both of my first boss out of undergrad, and then my first boss out of business school. My first manager out of undergrad, his name's Thomas Kurian. I believe I was the first person to report to him. He's now, he's done amazing things. He was president. Became president of Oracle eventually, and now he runs Google Cloud and all this. But I remember in my first, probably 6 months on the job, it was in the late 90s, and I started getting very cynical. I'm like, why am I at this big company? And, sometimes it gets a little bureaucratic, sometimes a little political. And he's like, Sal, the one thing you just always have to remember is just how do you make yourself better, and how do you make the people around yourself better every day? And if you have that lens, then you're less likely to get cynical about, well, if I got run over by a bus, will the company even notice, and all that. You're just going to put one foot in front of the other and try to make the world a little bit better every day. So I thought that was very powerful. And then after business school, my first job was at this very small hedge fund, Wohl Capital Management. It was literally myself and Dan Wohl. I was the first person he hired. And I remember, the stereotype in finance, and especially in as a hedge fund, is that you're going to work super long hours, devote your soul to work, so to speak. And I was kind of prepared to do that. And I remember after, it was really a few days on the job, he's like, hey, Sal, why are you still here? This was like at the markets had closed. It was probably 5:30 in the evening. And he said, why are you still here? I was like, well, I'm working. And he's like, no, go home. And I'm like, okay, I'll work from home. And he's like, no, you're missing the point, Sal. Our job as investors is not to just work day and night, which will only deplete us and probably lead to us making many bad decisions. Our job is to be fully depleted, have other interests, be able to think out of the box so that we avoid bad decisions, because we only have to make a few really good decisions every year. And, that was kind of a really, I thought, powerful notion. And what it did is it created space in my life for me to pursue other things that I didn't have to hide. I actually sometimes would tell my boss about, hey, I'm working on this. I'm tutoring my cousins. It's really fun. I'm getting to teach them algebra. And he's like, oh, that's cool. I was like, look, I made some videos, and, I wrote some software, and Khan Academy wouldn't exist if he didn't give that space. And, frankly, he retired to focus more on his family, but he was and is an incredible investor. So it did work for him. I think some people kind of view it as a zero-sum game, that you have to kind of sacrifice your soul for work, or sacrifice your work for your soul. Actually, it's probably you have to feed both in order for both to do well. And so what I always tell folks like yourself, who I think are constantly struggling, I struggled with this at your age, between this tension of, do I kind of play it safe, get a job, get a salary, try to go, pick up some skills, build my resume, versus do I take the plunge of entrepreneurship, which is scary. It's, it's high variance, high risk. What I say is, especially in the early stage, look, if you build something that looks like it's just growing like a hockey stick, like, the next Facebook, take a leave of absence and run with it. But for most folks, it is good to invest, build those skills in kind of a traditional way, wherever it makes sense, but make sure you don't sell your soul to that. Make sure that you always have some time where you can fiddle with your passions. You can work on stuff, you can help folks, you can volunteer, you can work on some entrepreneurial stuff, because that'll give you a little bit of balance in your life. And that, over time, if that second piece starts to get some real traction, then you will have the option value. A lot of folks, when they hear Khan Academy story, they say, okay, Sal went from tutoring his cousins, he quit his job, and it got huge. That's kind of true, but it happened a lot slower than the way I just described it. It really happened. I started tutoring my cousins in 2004. I started writing software for them in 2005. I started making videos in 2006, all while I had a day job that I was using to pay the mortgage, pay off my debt, support the family, build savings, which is very important if you're going to be an entrepreneur. And it wasn't until 2009, so 5 years after I started tutoring my cousins, where I'm like, I think this is a real thing. I think I should take the plunge. And even then, when I quit my job and we were living off of savings, it was incredibly stressful, even though I had done it that kind of methodically and that slowly. But at least I had the option value. If I did have some savings, I had by that point been able to pay down most of my debt, things like that. And so it allowed me, it gave me that option value. So yeah, that's my best advice I could give, is like, The pendulum doesn't have to swing all the way until it really has to swing all the way.
Right. And I know you have to leave soon, but one more question. Very sorry about that. The last question is my question, quote, my question, this person works at an ed tech startup called Primer, where one of the biggest challenges they're trying to tackle is installing an inherent love for learning in the kids that they serve. So the question is, in what ways can we revolutionize education to cultivate a love for learning?
Yeah, that it really is the ultimate question, because today when people are engaged and motivated, I mean, we have stories. There's a young girl in Afghanistan who, started on Khan Academy when the Taliban kept the girls in her town from going to school, and she just went off to the races, between chores. She smuggles herself into Pakistan to take the SAT. She gets political asylum once the New York Times writes an op-ed about her, meets Sultana, the Taliban's worst fear. And now she's doing quantum computing research at Tufts. So the resources exist. If someone is motivated between Khan Academy and MOOCs and a bunch of other stuff, it's there. So, what you're alluding to, I really do think is the ultimate question. I think part of it is actually, not doing harm. There's not a 4 or 5 year old on the planet that I've met that isn't curious, that does not want to learn. You put an unfamiliar object in front of any 4 or 5 year old, they'll grab it. They'll cry and they'll want to explore it and everything. And I think what happens in our traditional school model is, our current school model, for better, it does many things well. We're all products of it, but a lot of kids, they have a gap here, gap there. They don't get something. And the current school system kind of makes them feel dumb. It's like, oh, you didn't get it. Here's a C. We're going to put it on your grade book. We're going to talk to your parents about it. And once you fall a little bit behind, it's just going to get harder and harder and harder and harder. And it's only human nature that you're going to disengage. You're just going to say, oh, maybe I don't really need to do this. This isn't my thing. While if you're allowed to engage, and if you're engaging at your level and you're really feeling that joy of learning, I actually think every human being on the planet would get as excited about Euler's identity as I am, because it is worth getting excited about. And it's just that we'd have to give folks the opportunity to do so. So that's my best guess. On top of that, I always say that the way we evaluate, let's pick on math, factoring a polynomial or being able to take a derivative, these are important skills, but they're tools in service of broader things. What the math professors at USC do, they're doing very creative forms of math, and the math, the calculus is really just a tool. But what we're doing, the way we evaluate people, it's like evaluating an artist's potential based on how well they mix paint, or a dancer's potential based on how flexible they are when they're 12 years old. And yes, it is good to know how to mix paint if you're going to be a painter. And yes, it is good to be flexible if you're going to be a dancer, but that's not actually your potential. And so I actually think there should be more opportunities earlier on as you build these core skills, which are very important, to also be able to express them and also be able to use them in creative ways.
Well, Sal, I want to thank you so much for taking time. And I know we went a little bit over the time that you had, and then you have to get to another thing you have going on. But I really do want to thank you first for helping me graduate high school through your tutorial videos on YouTube. But also thank you for taking the time to speak with us and speak to the audience. I want to wish you the best of luck with Schoolhouse World and with Khan Academy. I can't wait to just see the amazing things that come up in the future. So thank you, Sal, a ton for coming through and for speaking to all of us today. You've been amazing, and I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the audience has as well.
Great. No, thanks for having me. And, when all of y'all become hyper successful entrepreneurs, remember that Khan Academy is a not-for-profit organization, and maybe I played a little bit of a role in your billions, and you should give back.
And of course, I want to encourage the audience to go ahead and donate to Khan Academy right now.
I know most of y'all are poor college students right now, so I'm not going to ask you for that now. But when, first billion, 1% to Khan Academy, just something to think about.
Oh, definitely. So once again, Sal, thank you so much. I want to thank the founders team for putting this together. We spent a lot of time and effort into the marketing and for getting Sal here. So I want to thank the team a ton for all the effort that they put in. And of course, I want to thank the audience for coming, because this whole thing wouldn't have been possible without you all. And just as one last plug, if you're not a broke college student, definitely donate to Khan Academy. As one last thank you a ton.
Thank you. No, thanks for having me. And sorry for the scheduling stuff, but this was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
No worries. All right. Have a good night, everybody.